I'm Steven.
And I'm Spencer. Welcome to Ragnarokast, your podcast for all things marketing and MarTech.
Hello, everyone. We're the co-CEOs of Ragnarok.
This is going to be the worst podcast you've ever been on. I'm already getting that feeling that you're a pro. You've probably done this more than we have.
You know what the problem is? We're just not paying enough money to do this podcast recording.
Oh, yeah?
If we were to throw like $38 more at it, Boris would be okay.
I think it's basically about $30. I think we're talking about $38.
We got to get this guy a gift card.
Yeah, like the desk. Like you could sell this desk and then you could get the, yeah.
Welcome, Boris.
Thanks for having me.
This is Steven, who you already know.
Who's that?
We are the co-hosts of this podcast. This will be aired or posted, whatever terminology we want to use, at an indeterminate date in the future.
Okay. Do you think it'll be in 2024?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, it'll be this year. I think next month, ? 2 months?
Wow. Maybe before the Super Bowl. Who knows?
So if you're just tuning in now,
Or on the Super Bowl.
Even better. Let's aim for that. Let's aim for
that's a good
Super Bowl release.
Yeah.
No,
Whenever that is.
It's not February. February Insider. We have Insider for February.
Oh.
So maybe March. So March.
Oh, okay. So
It's fine.
March.
Maybe we should pay another $5 for that Asana project.
Yeah. Hannah, where are you? Hannah.
The person who actually does the schedule is
You have
not
a
here.
schedule. Yeah.
Things
I
like
understand.
dates don't matter to us, Boris.
Time.
What is time? Time is a construct. Anyway, so this is releasing at some point, which if you're listening to it right now, is now.
Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, this is the release.
This is the present.
This content is timeless.
I will admit, Boris, that I am personally newer to the Census verse. Census verse And so
Or the Census.
We call it the consensus internally.
I think, I was going to definitely call our first conference that. And that's what we did a small virtual conference and we called it Consensus.
Oh, awesome.
I mean, it makes sense for a conference, right?
Yeah.
There's a crypto company.
That works out really well.
Oh, Census Census.
Consensus.
Yeah, I like that.
That's cute.
I think it literally means to bring people together. Anyway.
Oh, that's so cute.
There's a problem that
heartwarming.
there's a crypto company that named their conference the same thing. So I need that to end. Then I can really own that name.
Oh, you into crypto, bro?
You guys want to talk about the blockchain?
Yeah, no, we're gonna put your customer data on the blockchain and everything's gonna work out.
Yeah.
It'll just be real slow. But it'll be so good, I guess. Who needs a clean room when you have, the blockchain?
I get NFTs, bro. You want to trade NFTs?
I think I might still have one from just trying it out.
Yeah, I've got an NFT of a painting of a cat that I bought for $2.
Yeah, I think I have a JPEG of a cat.
Yeah.
I said, let's try this out. I think I've probably spent more in fees than it's worth. Yeah.
Somewhere around $38 in fees.
No, come on, man. Less than that.
So NFTs and Bitcoin bros aside,
Yeah.
do you mind introducing us to yourself and to the Census verse in general?
Totally. So my name is Boris Jabes. I am the CEO of a company called Census, I started about 5 years ago. My life is one of always building tools that make people more productive, more successful, having more leverage in life. She started my career at Microsoft on Visual Studio, which is a tool that I think a lot of people now have learned about even in the data world, which is kind of cool. And the fun part when you work on developer tools is you work at the very bottom of the software industry, right? You're the tool that people use to make other tools, other apps that people then use. And I worked on the lowest level. So Chrome was built using our tools and Windows was built using our tools. And the fun part about that is that I learned very early that if you can make those people like 1% better, you have a massive effect on the world, right? Because you make Chrome 1% better, you make Windows 1% better, then everything else gets benefit. And so leverage is a very powerful thing. I mean, Archimedes wrote that way before we were born, but I felt it very viscerally when I worked at Microsoft. And so about 12 years ago, I guess, I quit to start my first company. It was a company called Meldium that was a employee identity product, what you would call single sign-on. In plain English, it was a password manager, but designed for teams and for companies. That was because we were like, SaaS is everywhere, or it will be everywhere. At the time, people had like 2 pieces of SaaS at every company, but now it's 300, right? And so we felt like if you're going to use all this SaaS, which is great, everyone having their pane of glass, great tools for $19, then employee identity, your login would be everywhere, and therefore it'd be nowhere, and you would have chaos. And so we built a tool that people could really use to log into their apps and that as a company, you'd have a visibility over who your employees are and where they are and what tools they have access to. So that was like everybody wins, and you can have more SaaS, which is more productive and just gives people more freedom to use the tools they want. We sold that business, and as I started working at the company we sold to called Log Me In, which is a very apt name for what we were doing.
I've heard of them,
Yeah, they were based in Boston. And what I found was we were a very product-led company, right? The company that we had sold, Meldium, was fully self-serve, right? It had a lot of usage analytics that were very useful very helpful to understand how to talk to customers. And when we sold the business and we started working with a much larger organization, we started working with their sales and marketing team.
Right.
And they tended to write and engage our users terribly. And I thought it was a cultural problem, but in reality, there was like a tool problem. And it's because they lived in their panes of glass, right? Salesforce, Zendesk, et cetera.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what I knew about our users because it was sitting in the product and analytics side of the house. And so it felt like we should fix this, right? We should connect those two worlds. I didn't want to connect them in a way that would just create more pipes for the world that are disparate, because there's already lots of ways to connect system A to system B, right? There's tools like Zapier, and they were around. What I wanted is to do the same thing we did for the single sign-on and password style, which is there should be a central place, and we should federate out of that. We should try to find a way to get it out of one place, because then it's like a broker that you can trust, because you can centralize.
Right.
And so that's how Census was born. That's why the name is Census, because the idea is there should be just one. And so we built it about 5 years ago. It was our first version. And we started working with kind of high scale software companies. We built it out of the data warehouse, which was kind of nascent at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So products like Snowflake and Redshift and Databricks. And now we've got like 20 of them. But, we said, what if we use the data that you have, the data infrastructure that you have, and just give access to everybody else in the company to what the data and analytics teams already have. And that's what Census does, right? It allows a marketing team to build audiences or campaigns directly against the same data that the analytics team uses to make dashboards for the CFO. So you get the same quality of data, but you actually get to use it for, engaging with customers and doing operational stuff at your company where, hopefully money gets made and better brand experiences occur.
Obviously, this is a problem for a long time because things were kind of living in a sort of marketing automation software. Yeah. 5-6 years ago, it'd be something like, this is before like the Braze and the iterables really came into play. We're talking about like, exact target vis-a-vis Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Oracle Responses. And you had kind of a crusty SQL database. You had to kind of meld into that. But that's also around the time that like Segment was starting and some of the kind of what would become the big CDP players in the space. So what was the sort of biggest pain point that you felt like you were solving? Even like this stuff was available. It just wasn't easy, I guess, to access.
Yeah. Things change relatively fast in our industry. And then, of course, I live and work in San Francisco, where we often are even like a couple of years ahead of everybody else changing. So there's always like, we're just always on the next thing in some ways. But the pain I felt, the thing I saw was that there were tools for connecting data together. That's for sure not new. And I think Segment, you're right, had been around at that point for a while. And what it did very, very well at the time was take your events from a website, right, or from your app, and connect them very seamlessly to marketing tools. And it did nothing to help, let's say, your CFO do analytics on your billing, on your Stripe data.
Right.
It did nothing to help the sales team figure out which accounts to upsell based on their usage. Mm-hmm. It didn't really help the support team on kind of providing different levels of SLAs for different kinds of customers. Right. So they were just like, we weren't trying to say, what is Segment not doing? In fact, all of our early customers, all of them had Segment.
Right.
And then they bought Census as well. And they also bought Snowflake as well. And I think they were just solving different problems and different sides of the house. People were buying Snowflake and databases like it because you need, ultimately, you when you have more and more sources, more and more channels in which you engage with customers, you need to coalesce it somewhere. It is actually like you can't just magically do that, right? There's not like, you can't just say, take my Stripe data and my Klaviyo data and just tell me who's doing what across those two things. That's
right, because one's object and one's user.
Yeah. And like they're living in two different execution engines, two different websites, two different permissioning models. Like that doesn't just, you need a technological solution for that. Right. And so data warehouses were literally designed to solve this problem.
Yep.
To dump all your data, do batch processing in order to provide answers to the questions that, leaders needed at a company. But those were very much around slow after the fact processes, right? They're like, figure out my business in post.
Right.
What happened last quarter? What happened last year? Tell Wall Street. And we just built it out of that because it had all the information and it could be used in very flexible ways to make the scenarios that were not well done by, let's say, the singular pipe that existed to marketing tools. We could solve it with that platform. And then it had all these fun side effects that over the last 5 years have become real shifts in our industry, right? Well, one is the thing I just said earlier, like the amount of SaaS just keeps increasing.
Right.
The amount of things that read and generate customer data or data as a whole, call it any widget information, like you said, user, object, et cetera, just keeps increasing. And so the need to centralize it and make sense of it across multiple tools just keeps going up as well, because no single tool seems to be able to get a complete view, because it's actually getting harder.
Right.
Just like logging into apps, like it's just like there's more and more of them, right? So you can't just kind of shoehorn the solution.
Yeah, until Okta supports it all.
Until Okta supports it all, which is, why that kind of technology makes sense too. You need some kind of, in that world, you need an identity provider. And in my world, I felt like you just increasingly need some broker for that data, and it needs to be flexible. And so if you're only ever going to do marketing out of two tools, then maybe you can get away with the same solutions that we had 5 years ago.
Right.
But I think one thing that doesn't seem to be stopping is more and more channels for more and more users across, more time. And you're going to need to serve them well. Personalization matters, but also like just reaching them where they are at the right time just becomes more subtle and more important as the years go by.
So that's an interesting thing. I want to hone in on that. You know, people are going to use more than two tools because there's more use cases, right? But you're kind of in this place in the market right now where we have this sort of best in breed stack where people are focusing on very much doing this kind of narrow use case that they solve across many industries, but they're kind of building more and more into becoming cloud software again, vis-a-vis Klaviyo adding a CDP component.
Totally.
Braze around the corner from adding a CDP component at this point. It's only a matter of time before we see that with a lot of other, I even think of like Intercom as an example.
100%.
So
100%.
So in that case, right, do we have in the future still a sort of large democratized set of tools that we need to centralize, or are we actually shortening the amount of tools like we did 5-6 years ago, kind of going back into the cycle where Salesforce built into that, or Oracle?
Yeah, it's a really good question of the forces in our industry that cause, the usual way people describe this is like the bundling and unbundling.
Right.
I actually think if everything is trying to be a system of record, which is what every SaaS product is trying to be in some way,
right, it's
hard to imagine all of them becoming a system of record. Like they can all say they are, but it seems very hard to imagine any of those products that you just named doing a good job on every dimension. So you're going to use Salesforce, let's say. Let's use the classic, the ultimate, like in terms of unified platforms, right? Way more than Intercom or Braze or Klaviyo. Let's take Salesforce.
Unified with the, heavy quotes.
Yeah, that it does everything in some form.
Right.
But you want to provide a great customer support experience? Listen, the service cloud is not great, and you might decide to use Intercom instead. So it only takes a couple of exits on any dimension that you want to serve your customers for the SaaS product to suddenly no longer be the one truth of everything. Oh, and are you going to do your billing in Klaviyo? I doubt it.
Yeah.
It's very hard to see a universe where there isn't disparate data in disparate systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, there's always going to be pressure for people that need to get correct data, consistent data, to get some kind of coalesced version of it somewhere. Right. By the way, we might enter a world in 10 years where Snowflake and data warehouses are no longer the way people do it.
Right.
But you're going to need a technology that is very good at storing all the data, joining all the data, and letting you make insights on all the data so that you can take the right action on a user. And a universe where all of the products you just named are good enough at doing that is the equivalent of all of them being also Snowflake.
Right.
How about that?
Yeah.
That's fair.
Which maybe, maybe Braze is we're going to be Snowflake. All right. Let's I like that ambition.
Pretty sure they're built on Snowflake. So that would cause some issues, but But so in terms of, data accuracy, so you're talking about bringing in data from all over the place. How do you know if it's reliable? How do you know if it's useful? Like, is there a consensus help with something like that?
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the biggest problems that we see with people trying to jump in and use data warehouses as the true source is it's not necessarily clean.
Right.
And it's not necessarily well documented for sure. And it's reliable on a couple of key skill sets, let's say, of folks who rotate quite a bit through different companies. And so that knowledge doesn't transfer very well typically.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I don't believe today there is yet a singular magical solution that will tell you this data is right. The closest I think we have to that is probably the checks and balances and controls we have when we invented gap accounting.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's probably the closest thing we've invented as a society to say we have a system to determine that these numbers are correct.
I mean, in the email world, there's there's tools like Kickbox to do email verification.
Yeah, but that's as reliable as how many records are in their database, right? Which I think is the same thing that we have across the industry, right? It's as reliable as their understanding of that interpretation, as opposed to a aligned process that we all have around this.
I think that's the key. I think the right answer is not to say, oh man, the data could be wrong. And it's like, yeah, mistakes will happen.
Yeah.
I recommend most people at most companies to take an improv class.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, what? What's he talking about?
Yes, and
not for the yes and, but for for the embracing of failure, right? One of the most fun exercises in improv is that they'll force you to come up with a story and you will fail, right? At some point, it's like, I don't, the words don't come out right because they're pushing you to just be creative on the spot. And the culture in improv when that happens is to consider that success. Literally everyone in the room will go, yeah, you failed. It's a really weird, cathartic kind of religious experience. And my point is, yeah, your data is going to be wrong at some point. Not every marketing campaign is going to be perfect. You are going to make mistakes. The key is, I think, to create a good set of incentives and a process by which it improves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think before Census came around, there were distinct groups in a company trying to solve this without helping each other.
Yeah,
right.
So there was a CFO working with an analytics team and the CEO to say, what did we do last quarter in sales? What did we do? And which user is the most active and which ones drive the most sales of the Ray-Bans, whatever, right? And that was almost wholly separate from a team of, let's call it marketers or growth marketers who were trying to say, I want to build a campaign for who might use this thing and I'm going to make an email. And both of them can make mistakes, but ideally you want those mistakes to lead both of them to get better.
Yeah.
And to not have waste across those two. And so that's really what we tried to build with Census, is to say, if we can make the one side that marketing and sales and support were not touching because it was of the world of product and finance, let's call it, but we make it just as accessible as using the data in Braze.
Mm-hmm.
If we make it just as accessible, the same number of clicks, the same user experience, but you're using that data, then every improvement they make, you get. And every discovery of a mistake you find in marketing, you can improve on their side as well.
Yeah. And since we work in, primarily retention, personalization, we often end up working with both marketing and product teams.
Yeah.
And we find this a lot where the marketing and the product teams aren't talking to each other. They have completely different tools. And part of our unspoken job is, to ourselves at least, is to try to get them to slowly consolidate.
Yeah.
Because not for our sakes, but because it'll actually make their lives easier.
Look, when I started the company, good luck. I had a real hard time talking to my parents about what it is, because password manager, they can understand, right? Kind of. But CRM, database, marketing automation, none of those words mean anything to mom and dad, right? And it took me about 45 minutes on that first call when they're like, what are you doing? And I finally found a very simple example that everyone can appreciate, especially when you live in Canada where my parents live, which is everyone has called customer support of a major corporation. And it is the most common thing you can ask, right? To ask your parents, be like, how many times do they ask you who you are and what the information is, even within a singular call? And my parents were convinced that this was some kind of weird security thing. And I'm like, no.
That's what they tell you anyway.
That's what they tell you.
Yeah.
But it's actually a data federation problem. They actually don't know how your phone number is connected to who they're talking to. And they don't pull up that information on the fly when they're talking to you. And that's something everyone feels. Forget like driving retention in actual numbers, which is the scientific part of the problem, but just general, like the experience you have as a customer with a company can be so frustrating. Yeah. We got an email just the other day. My co-founder forwarded it to the engineering team to get a laugh. But it was a marketing email. It was kind of a sales / marketing email, right? Very much using the pretext of us being a user to kind of pitch us something. And it says, you've been a user since December. Except it was December, like 4.5 years ago is when we became a customer. It's like they just ignored the fact that we've been a customer for over 4 years.
Right.
Which is almost like you don't really care. And it could just be a singular data mistake and no big deal and you fix it. Or it could just be they're not even trying. And
they forgot to add the why to that date.
Yeah. And so it's like you can make it better across the board on all these things.
And with that in mind, you're talking about the call center. They don't know that, you put in an email support ticket and now you're calling. So that's like identity resolution.
Well, you have to describe that email support ticket to them every time you're on the phone with them.
Yeah.
Can I get the reference code for that, please?
Yeah, there's all those things. Yeah.
I love when I pick up and it just know it's like based on my phone number. They just know it's me.
It's magic.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. It makes it so much easier.
It's like the Verizon assistant. Hello, Steven.
It happens to so few brands. And that's like breathing. I'm not even talking about getting fancier. When you check out at a store, let's say they have a loyalty card. Let's say they're actually getting more sophisticated than just the things we've been talking about. Are they going to bring up your last purchase that you made 2 months ago in those 10 seconds when you're at the counter, when they have the information technically because they know who you are because of the loyalty card? No. Like there's so many ways in which we are not getting a delightful experience that we can make better with data, with data that you can trust in more places. And by the way, I actually think my secret kind of discovery here is, remember what I said at the beginning, I think people should always seek to have maximum leverage, which is in other words, have the most impact across the most number of people at your organization. And there are a lot of people working in data or product, right, that have tremendous skill at uncovering insights about the user base. And they would love for that to get used on the other side. And a lot of what you work on with retention, there's basic things everyone should do that I'm sure many people are not, and you just bonk them over the head with that. But sometimes it's like, why don't you bring the data science team that is eager to help to bear on the problem, right? And everybody wins.
Yep.
I mean, have you ever worked with a data scientist before, though? No, I'm just kidding.
All the data scientists listening to this are like, come on, man. I liked you now. I'm unsubscribe. Unsubscribe.
Yeah, but how much of performance marketing have you seen being run by people who don't understand mathematics?
Or don't understand how to run an A/B test or what a control group
is. Which is statistics.
Yeah, just statistics.
And all the marketers are out there like, unsubscribe.
Yeah, this podcast is telling me I'm not good. No.
No, it's fine. But on identity resolution, like Steven, for both of you guys, like, what are some of the challenges? I guess this is a two-part. Yeah. What are some of the challenges you've seen? Maybe you could bring some, either test one or an anonymized case study.
Yeah.
And then something. Oh, because we actually have mutual clients. Maybe you could use one of our mutual clients he could talk about how Census actually solved the problem.
I would say our mutual clients are pretty well solved on identity resolution, but I'll give you a different scenario that I think is a little bit more interesting. There'll be an anonymized client.
Okay.
But so there's always this problem between who you are anonymously on one application and when you identify on another application, even though it's the same brand. So let's say web and then mobile app, right?
Yeah.
And there's a consolidation that happens when you are kind of identified on both tools, but there's no persistence in some cases because of things like the app gets updated and therefore refreshed, or your browser cookie expires, or any number of things, and it requires you to continually log in. So you're constantly generating new users for yourself, right?
Yep.
Common problem in the industry. And when you kind of build an identity hierarchy, you're always coming back to this point of like, okay, well, what's the most common denominator between all these systems share? And you always end up with, it's an email address that I log in with, or my interpretation of an email address that I created through a database UUID or something like that.
Yes, indeed.
But when you think about how much waste is created in that process, right? So I as an anonymous user generate a UUID on the record, and then I basically inherit that UUID when I convert that experience, and that UUID becomes the parent ID for all of my other login actions, and those other UUIDs more or less become reference points for that main one. That problem gets extended when you have sources of data that don't even use email address, and they have to kind of connect into this UUID through some other means. Let's say you're connecting with an external partner and you can't share that PII level data.
Correct.
And so now you have to kind of roll back into just an ID record attached to maybe a cookie ID or some other type of database ID they're using it. And this problem just compounds, becomes more and more complex. And ultimately, you kind of nail down this point where you're like, I'm just going to have a lot of rows of the same user, and I'm going to have some type of join table where I unify them up. But ultimately, you still don't have a kind of fully identified user because there's a bunch of other things that they still haven't identified on that you're still waiting for. And this sort of creates this disjointed experience to the person because they think they're logged in when they're not. And you don't prompt them to log in until the very end of the product experience because you don't want to prevent their conversion, right? So how do you kind of think it, strategically speaking, right? I mean, the mechanics of this aside, right? How do you kind of think about like this problem of like I need to, like as a brand, like I need to personalize more. In order to personalize more, I need to know that hell I'm talking to. But in order to do that, I have to do that in sort of a very in a privacy concentric fashion where I can lean in on some of the providers out there that use device IDs to kind of join this stuff. But how good is that in the future? Like I have to think about how do I set the expectation with my users that until I know who you are, I can't personalize this, but you want me to personalize this, and you assume I know who you are. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I was having dinner last night, and this, this came up a little bit where it's like, oh, but it's creepy. And I'm like, no, but it's not that creepy up to a point. And then that's really what you want.
Yeah.
A lot of people recently have like started turning on like, all these iCloud relay type things, and they're going, the ads kind of suck. And I'm like, yeah. Turns out you actually kind of like some amount of personalization. You just don't like two different companies, I think, sharing information about you. I think that's the part that people found icky.
Right.
But I think within a brand, you absolutely do want to personalize. So, okay, there's a lot to unpack, I think, in what you asked. First, you implied right there something I think super important, which is when people say the word identity resolution, which is a big and fancy concept, let's split what you said, which is there's one aspect, which is taking an anonymous user and giving them some kind of telling you that it's Joe.
Like a golden record type scenario.
Well, hold on. No, I think there's a part that's just de-anonymizing, right? Tracking an anonymous user and telling you once that person logged in that was Joe. Then there is what I think the much more interesting problem personally, like at a technological level, I find more interesting, which is what you spent time talking about, which is, well, you have 5 Joes, whether that's because there's Joe in the billing system, the Joe in the customer support system, and the Joe in the like partner system, and they may be identified by any number of things. And you need to figure out that the golden record that is Joe, right? That is like, that's actually the same Joe 4 times. Let's merge them, aggregate them, deduplicate them. That I actually think is a harder problem. The first one is important for a lot of companies. It's actually completely unimportant to some. And I think as people start to embrace much more of a direct relationship with a customer, you will find them pushing towards registration earlier, I think, over time. And so that anonymous to non-anonymous will reduce over time in terms of how much time you spend thinking about that. And there's somewhat easy solutions to it, right? You can kind of point at a .identify call somewhere and get it done. I think the merging deduplication is gnarly and interesting. And again, I'm not sure there's a perfect endpoint. I don't know that it's like, well, you apply some magical tool and you got it. I'm sure Amperity would say otherwise, and they would say like, buy this Ferrari, and like, we will give you a perfect Joe at the end.
Right, but still probabilistic at the end of the day.
Of course, at the limit, even at Facebook, it's probabilistic. Imagine I've met someone who owned this at Facebook, and it's like, even there, it's probabilistic. But I think you can make this an iterative process, and it is easier now to do this with like tools like a warehouse, is what I'm trying to say, because joining is and trying ways to compute connections between people is more doable. I also think there's other ways to personalize above, like you said, something very true, which is eventually you have to create this kind of identity that is a bag of identities, right?
Right.
There's 2 things I think that go beyond that. One is there are sometimes bags that are not just a singular person. I'll give you a non-anonymous example. I'll talk about a real company, Sonos. Okay. Sonos is super interesting. They have multiple ways you buy products. right? You can buy them online. You can buy them at Costco, right? All that stuff. The way they map the resulting speaker into you is actually not one-to-one with you. It's actually, you register it in a household. You probably don't even think about this if you use Sonos, but it's actually, the data model is the speaker belongs to a household and you belong to that household.
I see.
And so that's actually really important for Sonos as how they engage with customers. Right?
Because I guess multiple people could connect to that same speaker in that same household, right?
Correct. And all of this is important when you're doing Google ads for the new speaker, and someone's like, "I bought it at Sonos and I registered it. Why are you still advertising the thing to me?" It's like, oh yeah, because the pixel didn't flow from that, right? And so I actually think just modeling things in a way that makes sense to your business can go a long way. Now, you asked about how do you do personalization with a world where privacy becomes more and more of a concern.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about who you are, like what you are, there's like a nominal identity to Spencer and Steven, which is your name and your lineage or whatever. But there is what I would call, to get really, really nerdy, you are also you have a structural identity. You have I am this tall. I am like, my sports team is this team, right? You're basically a bag of attributes.
Right.
Not just a name.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one way we'll get through the privacy kind of barrier is that there's a lot you can do, whether that's sharing across companies or within your company using tools where you're like uncomfortable. Like you might buy an AI tool that's going to do stuff. You don't want to literally say, here's my user, Steven, but you're okay giving it a bag of attributes and engaging with that user as a bag of attributes. Mm-hmm. I think that's how we're going to get through. How do I maintain privacy, but engage with the person in all the ways that matter? So
it's almost like we typically call this concept like a microsegmentation, where there's shared behaviors or shared attributes amongst these users. And so the messaging that would resonate would be equal or similar.
Yeah. But even in the very, very limit, does it matter that your name is Steven? Like, for almost everything I will do for you, it doesn't matter. Right? Almost. So even within a company, we have some customers that are extremely privacy conscious. Mm-hmm. They're in other countries usually. And yeah, there's a lot they do to mark things as like PII. And so even though they have maximum flexibility in the data platform, the various users of our system get various levels of visibility into what's in the column, right? But they're still able to do all the campaigns they want to do. And so I think treating humans as bags of properties, bags of attributes, may actually be better than saying, oh, it's Anna, it's Joe.
Yeah.
There's nothing that makes me feel warmer inside than being considered a bag of attributes.
I mean, you're a bag of mostly water. So
that's fair.
Your primary attribute is water. That's right. I think you're like 90% water, right?
A little bit of carbon.
Yeah.
Just a bit.
So in your case, mostly beard.
Mostly beard and beers and coffee.
That's true.
I mean, what else do you need?
A little bit of kombucha.
Oh yeah, gotta get the booch.
Gotta even it out somehow. So shifting gears for a sec, there's been a debate going on LinkedIn about after Twilio's lead got ousted.
Yeah,
Jeff Lawson. Yeah,
Jeff Lawson. Very long run.
Yeah. Also, just one of the coolest guys you'll ever meet.
Absolutely.
Karaoke king.
And like, by the way, fun fact, like, it's like Truly was always about developers, right? And so I feel like that says something.
Yeah. Segment has always been selling to developers.
Well, Twilio long before Segment. Oh. Yeah. But yes, I think
maybe that was what made it a good fit then.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Segment's superpower in terms of go-to-market was that it, as an engineer, it was like, I'm just going to go use that analytics.js. Right?
So with that in mind, though, there's a lot of people are checking under the turtle shell, the rock there. And, you have people looking at the CDP as a rock and saying, oh, where's the money under here? I need to shake the money out. So like there's a lot of questioning of the ROI and how does a CDP make you money in the first place? And what are your thoughts on that?
Just to piggyback off of that, I know you consider yourself a CDP, but do you really consider yourself a CDP? Okay.
I don't really consider myself a CDP.
Okay.
But let's work into that.
Yes. Sorry.
Let's go back to the other one and then we'll work into this.
I think there's a technological kind of set of conversations people are having about this, whether it's on LinkedIn or elsewhere. And then there's the business kind of questions.
I'm thinking more of the business questions because I'm, Stephen and I are co-CEOs, and one of my jobs is to make sure that we're meeting our margin goals for the year and we're not spending so much. And so I'm looking at stuff and I'm like, do I really need this tool? Do I really need this license?
The $19 a month is like
the $19 a month. I'm like, you really got it. You might have sold me there because, maybe, but maybe not.
I mean, Boris, think about it. You can spend the money and then have to think about, was it worth me spending it? Or you can think, is it worth me to spend it right now and then not spend it? And you know what?
Yeah. So those are the things that keep me up at night. Yeah. But in terms of the CDP, like we know, like Stephen and I know, but how would you to the CEOs, the CFOs of the world who don't know, who aren't experts in this space?
I would go back to what we said like a little bit ago, which is there are very easy ways to measure the performance of a campaign, right? Mm-hmm. Like you talked about, you work on retention as a problem, right? Like you can almost certainly say, we will help you do ABC, we will charge you X, and it will lift retention 2%, which has a tangible dollar value, right? So you're not, I don't think you're saying you can't assign a dollar value to various, let's call it growth and marketing activities or sales activities. I think it's fair to say that like one of the things, for example, we help companies do, like I told you earlier, is like improve the SLA on a customer support call. That might be harder to then assign a dollar value to that. But even there, it might be a cost center optimization, right? It's like, well, we can't deliver this SLA to everybody. With prioritization, we can deliver the SLA and reduce, kind of overall staffing. What I would say is attractive about our approach, which again, I genuinely don't think of us as a CDP. We're not an all-in-one box that does, identity resolution and all these things. We connect to your warehouse that you already have, that you've already bought from someone else, and make it available to everyone else in the company. And in a way, it's plausible that we're structurally going to be better able to deliver ROI because 2 for 1, right? Everything the data team is doing for a completely different purpose, which the CDP used to not partake in, they will now be able to serve both purposes. I can only speak to the companies I've seen, but the need to do good audiences when it comes to advertising is not going away. The need to figure out how to drive a retention and growth, like upsell, both in individuals and in accounts when you're dealing with a B2B context, doesn't seem like it's going to go away.
Yep.
So I think you should definitely not buy a very expensive all-in-one solution and have a data team. You should probably pick one of the two.
Right.
So maybe you should have a data team and lighter solutions like what we sell, or avoid the entire eng team, data and eng team, and figure out if there's an all-in-one you can buy that will do everything for you. But yeah, ultimately, I think all of these teams, whether it's a data science team that's demonstrating its value or a all-in-one CDP demonstrating its value, you better drive lift or retention or something.
Yeah.
I think if none of that is true, if none of those things drive ROI, then yeah, not only is the CDP a bad business, but maybe a good chunk of data science is a bad business, which seems unlikely to me right now.
Right.
Your way around this is you're unlocking it for more teams beyond just marketing or one use case.
Exactly. Like, remember the name of the company, right? Like my weird hope is that companies can actually have a census, like in the literal sense.
Yeah.
And I do think if you leverage that work across multiple orgs rather than just marketing or just advertising, to even go back to the world of, DMPs and all that crap, you at the very least have the same cost on our side. For us, the COGS are the same, but you get hopefully 2, 3, 4, 5x the output, right? Yeah. And so then maybe the margins start to make sense. I used to joke, but it's true. Like the number one reason Census is not a CDP is, well, we're not a database. We don't have storage. Census has basically no storage, which is completely different than a CDP.
Right.
And that means it's also a cost we don't have and we don't pass on to the customer. So maybe we'll solve ROI on both ends.
You don't consider yourself a CDP, but then others would label you as if you're not a CDP, then you're a composable CDP.
Sure.
I think there's benefits to composability for sure. I mean, being able to customize your own solution in any case is not such a bad outcome. It's a packaging conversation, so to speak. What do you kind of think of that as we kind of talk about, or we talked about earlier, that these like Klaviyo is adding on more of like cloud type software. Braze will, it's seemingly going to be a CDP next week. What is the, when we talk about kind of like composability, is it just the optionality to pick the best pieces of that tool that you're looking for, but then give people the optionality to not necessarily have to buy it all and get to that point where they're at their customer service or Salesforce Service Cloud. That's it. Yeah. And then they're like, well, I need to move to Intercom because it's not solving my problem. Like, does composability actually help with that problem? Or is it just more of it's just a marketing pitch?
So I'm a software engineer first and foremost, right? And composability has a real meaning in software. Without composability in software, which goes all the way down to your programming language capabilities, right? You can't build scalable software. It's actually not possible because it's an issue of, if everything has to know about everything, if everything has to be deeply coupled, you just need extremely large teams and it's very hard to scale components. So to me, composability first, is valuable as a design precept. Forget the business concept of composability. Just designing your software in such a way that it can be plugged in and into one side or another. And if every piece of SaaS decides, for example, to not let its data be exported, imagine the world, like companies like Fivetran couldn't operate. Right. Which, think about it. If you're Braze, let's say in that example, your desire, if you're going to be a CDP, is eventually you should be like, well, I should also keep this data to myself, right? Keep you locked into this. So that would be the natural pressure. But I think the consumer is always going to create the reverse pressure, right? Which is to say, just as like government forces certain larger companies into this, like I think the market forces medium-sized companies into this, which is you must allow your data in and out. And so that to me is the first thing. Like composability means you are interoperable with other data and other software. And I think that's just good, period.
Right.
There are some set of businesses for which one size fits all will work. I think it absolutely will be true. They should evaluate those kinds of solutions. For the majority of businesses, you have something about your customer, your business view that is bespoke to you, A, and B, should span multiple channels. Like it goes back to what we said at the beginning. Like if everything happens only in one org, one department, one channel, then composability might not matter to you at the business level, right?
Right.
I still think it's good software practice, but it might not matter to you, and I would not push you. But I have yet to see any company trying to get to a certain scale stay in that kind of world. I do think Klaviyo, I could see where it comes from, right? Because the Shopify world is tons of tiny businesses,
right?
And so there might be a world where you're like, I actually don't blame them. Like, Klaviyo do a little bit more than the email, do a little bit of advertising. And like now I'm a CDP and maybe that's good enough for small scale type business, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's fine.
We're running up against the clock here, gentlemen. Would the two of you mind giving us like a 30 to 60 second kind of wrap up of everything we talked about? Maybe just like final insight. And I'm actually going to, I'm going to hear, watch
quite
this.
The ending. Just be insightful.
Yeah, if you could just be inspiring as well. Okay, that would be great. All right. Here you go, guys. Steven, you're up first. Go.
All right. So I think, Boris, some of the things we talked about today that were really insightful was about just, how to think about your sort of integration of your different tools from an operability across the vast majority of your organization. So kind of democratizing, so to speak, the access of that. And then thinking about some of the kind of current state of the market as we record this around CDPs or data warehouses, that there certainly is a lot that you can leverage there, but it's only as good as the effective business case that you're solving out of the back of it. So what would you like to add to that?
This is really good. Okay. I think what we said at the beginning, which bears repeating, is there is an ever increasing number of tools, applications, channels, etc. I think it's not only going to increase, it might even dramatically increase because now everyone using AI is going to make an app as well, whether it's internal or external. So we may actually see an explosion of what you and I would call an app, even though it might be much smaller and just built with ChatGPT. If that's true, what matters to delivering a good experience for the customer is, or for your business anyway, is having trust in your data, in my opinion. Like that is a cornerstone of delivering a good experience. Trust is not an endpoint, it's a process. It's like you got to create a virtuous cycle in which you have a feedback loop that helps you find the problems in your data. And I think doing that in one department across like in a singular tool is unlikely to succeed. That's my take. And so building some form of collaboration across organizations with tools, composability, and the right kind of infrastructure is a recipe for getting data you can trust into the hands of everyone in the business. And I think this only becomes more essential. We're going to have 3 pressures in the coming years. One is more and more automation, both because it's easier, AI, and also because you need to for like driving better workflows at scale. 2, we're going to have ever increase in kind of privacy expectations. And finally, I hit the number. And finally, to use, your favorite thing is like margins matter, like ROI matters. And so you're going to need to be scientific about how you spend your money, how you drive workflows, and do they work? And all of that means having a really good feedback loop between the actions that you take and the data that you have.
Well said.
Yeah.
I think we have a census here.
Yeah. Ayo. All right. Well, listeners and creepy watchers at home, please subscribe.
So wait, the data scientists don't like us, the marketers don't like us, and now the YouTube viewers don't like us either?
Pretty much, we've got nobody now. But yeah, so Boris,
but the blockchain people will just follow us.
They love us.
The blockchain bros, it's okay. Like we don't need them. It's okay. Sorry, guys. We love you, but also you're annoying. Boris, thank you for coming.
It was a pleasure.
I know it's a busy week with NRF and everything, or actually, NRF was months ago. So I don't. At the current time, not much is happening other than the things that you're working on at the current time. Everybody, check out Census if you haven't already. Here's Boris's personal cell phone number, so you can. I'm just kidding. And
by the way, that's one of those things that once it gets out, like my cell phone got out on something at some point, and it's like, oh my God.
Well, that's part of his bag of attributes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just a bag of attributes.
I think that's something that people will want to protect a lot more. And then we try, right? The laws actually try to prevent text spam.
Yeah.
And so it's funny how much we focus on email and your phone number is now wait till they get your Instagram and
bae, it's all over.
Steven doesn't have Instagram, so that's not going to be a problem. All right, everybody, like us, subscribe us, watch us, do whatever you do, TikTok things, and I don't know, wherever we are. Do it.
Thanks.
Adios.
Bye.